All right, thanks, Mark, and welcome to Hannity. And this is a Fox News alert. A massive new Democratic scandal is developing tonight. That's, in fact, Congressman Bob Brady is being investigated over the FBI on allegations that he bribed his 2012 primary opponent to drop out of the race and for later lying to investigators. Also tonight, the liberal establishment is being rocked by a new wave of sexual misconduct allegations. Plus, the reckoning continues for the Clintons. Right here, we will expose the biggest enablers of Bill's predatory behavior over the years. That is tonight's breaking news opening monologue. We start tonight. Liberal media lion Charlie Rose has now been fired by CBS, PBS, and Bloomberg TV. They have all cut ties to the anchor after the numerous damning, bizarre sexual misconduct accusations. Now, the original allegations are coming from a Washington Post report where 8 women are accusing Rose of inappropriate sexual behavior. This behavior includes making unwanted sexual advances, lewd phone calls, prancing around naked in front of people that were accusers, but also strangers, and even groping them. In a statement to the Washington Post, Rose did apologize for his inappropriate behavior. He says he was mistaken for pursuing what he thought were shared feelings. And earlier tonight, more accusers, in fact, have come forward. CBS News is now reporting that 3 more women who work at the company are also accusing Rose of unwanted sexual contact. And also tonight, the House Ethics Committee is investigating Democratic Congressman John Conyers after he admitted that his office paid out $27,000 of taxpayer money to settle a harassment complaint from a former staffer. The staffer says she was fired after rejecting the lawmaker's sexual advances. However, Conyers, he denies that claim. And today, the congressman and his office put out a statement confirming the settlement, but it said, quote, the amount that equated to a reasonable severance payment. Conyers still has some explaining to do because, according to the same bombshell report from BuzzFeed, other staffers have accused Conyers of requesting sexual favors and inappropriate touching. And one aide says her job was to use your taxpayer dollars to fly in women she assumed Congressman Conyers was having affairs with. And BuzzFeed is also reporting tonight that a new accuser is speaking out about Conyers, saying that she faced daily sexual harassment from the Democratic congressman that included unwanted touching. Now, Congressman Conyers, he is saying he will cooperate with the ethics investigations. Look, I don't agree with a word this guy has ever said over the years, but like everybody else, he is denying it. He's been accused of inappropriate sexual behavior, and as of now, with his denials, he deserves the presumption of innocence. Every American, as I've been saying, is entitled to that. I remain one of the few people on the air in the media that are consistent. Also, Democratic Congressman Conyers isn't alone when it comes to sexual misconduct allegations. 2 women have also come forward to accuse Senator Grope, Al Franken, of inappropriately touching them. Senator Franken is now owning up to those allegations, most likely because there is photographic evidence. Remember, radio host Leanne Tweeden released this photo where Franken is seen groping her while she's actually sleeping while they were both on a 2006 USO tour. And another woman put out this photo where she's alleging that Senator Franken grabbed her behind while taking a picture back in 2010. And as we've been telling you, Senator Al Franken has a long history of making all kinds of lewd and sexually offensive jokes, including one about actually drugging and raping Leslie Stahl. Of course, she's a co-host of 60 Minutes. Also tonight, we have new photos that have been uncovered. They show Franken groping Arianna Huffington during a 2000 photo shoot. And here you can see Franken grabbing Huffington's breast. And the second photo shows Franken touching her behind. And Arianna Huffington is rushing to Franken's defense tonight and saying that they were just having fun and that people shouldn't be offended by the photos. Now, the rest of the mainstream media won't tell you this, but this kind of gross behavior is part of a pattern when it comes to Al Franken. Take a look at this photo from 2000. Franken is seen right there, inappropriately touching Joy Behar while they're on the red carpet together. And just like Huffington, well, Behar shares his politics, and she's downplaying the photo and defended Franken's actions. Look, I've known Arianna for a long time. If she and Joy Behar, if they don't think anything's wrong with that, that is their choice. But from the outside, it looks kind of creepy. And it's probably something most people would think as well. I think many people will look at all of these photos and find that type of behavior beyond offensive. And what we're now seeing in Franklin is a pattern. Al Franken, we have Leanne Tweeden. She's asleep when he did that to her, and she rightfully was offended. Also tonight, yet another sexual misconduct scandal is now rocking Hollywood, this time from the chief creative officer and founder of Disney's Pixar and a huge Democratic donor, John Lasseter. And according to The Hollywood Reporter, Lasseter is now taking a leave of absence for what he is calling, quote, missteps, but others are calling it a pattern of unwanted grabbing, hugging, and kissing. And also in other news tonight, the president has weighed in on the Alabama Senate race with Roy Moore. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat, Jones. I've looked at his record. It's terrible on crime. It's terrible on the border. It's terrible in the military. Look, he denies it. I mean, if you look at what is really going on and you look at all the things that have happened over the last 48 hours, he totally denies it. He says it didn't happen. And, you know, you have to listen to him also. You're talking about, he said 40 years ago this did not happen. Roy Moore denies it. That's all I can say. He denies it. And by the way, he totally denies it.
And as the White House has been saying all week, President Trump, well, he's going to let the voters of Alabama decide the fate of Judge Roy Moore in light of Moore's vehement denials and repeated denials. And finally, as we promised to do last night, well, tonight we're naming names. We're exposing the people who have covered up for the Clintons for 30-plus years and made excuses for all of their behavior, all while attempting to discredit and utterly destroy all of his accusers. Let's start with the raging Cajun, James Carville. Now, he ran Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign, one of the fiercest defenders of Bill's sexual transgressions. For instance, Carville made this infamous comment about Paula Jones, who sued Bill Clinton for sexual harassment. Quote, you drag a $100 bill through a trailer park, you never know what you're going to find. And it was Carville who also slammed Jones by saying her lawsuit was, quote, all about money, plain and simple, and a healthy dose of right-wing politics. Now, the Jones case was a lot more serious than Carville ever claimed, because Clinton did end up paying over $850,000 in an out-of-court settlement. Next, former Clinton senior advisor, now ABC, Good Morning America anchor George Stephanopoulos. Stephanopoulos, he wrote in his memoir that in 1991, Hillary Clinton said, we have to destroy her, when describing one of Bill's accusers. He also helped oversee the Clinton campaign war room, all in order to deal with what some on the campaign were referring to as bimbo eruptions. And then in '99, after he left the White House, well, George Stephanopoulos confessed to NPR that he put aside his doubts about Bill Clinton. Why? Because he believed in the future president's message, and because he was an ambitious guy and he wanted to work in the White House. Next up, NBC. Well, that's the network that helped protect the Clintons for decades. In January of '99, NBC News reporter Lisa Myers taped the first exclusive interview with Juanita Broaddrick. I had the second. Remember, Juanita Broaddrick accused Bill Clinton of raping her in 1978. And as the Washington Post reported at the time, instead of airing the interview, NBC News president Andy Lack, he's still on the job, and other top executives, well, they sat on that interview for over a month. And at the time, NBC claimed, well, they couldn't corroborate Broaddrick's accusations, so it didn't air until February. Now, while all of this was going on, at the time, our colleague, Brit Hume, here on the Fox News Channel, and his panelists, well, they actually were wearing Free Lisa Myers buttons on air to encourage NBC to run the interview. Then in 2016, NBC correspondent, that's just last year, Andrea Mitchell, she falsely tried to claim that Broaddrick's claims had been discredited following an interview that I did with candidate Trump. Watch this. In one case, it's about exposure. In another case, it's about groping and fondling and touching against a woman's will.
And rape.
And rape.
Donald Trump using that word unprompted during an interview last night with Fox News' Sean Hannity, bringing up a discredited and long-denied accusation against former President Bill Clinton, dating back to 1978 when he was Arkansas Attorney General.
Wrong again. NBC was so offended by that, they later edited the online version of that clip to remove Andrea Mitchell using the word discredited. Now, the New York Times also jumped in to attack Clinton's accuser. Now, check out this headline from an op-ed. New York Times, Monica, the marketer, changes history script. That piece goes on to mock all the ways that Monica Lewinsky in the future would be able to capitalize from her affair with Bill Clinton. And finally, there's the worst enabler of them all, Hillary Clinton herself, who did everything within her power to smear, slander, besmirch all of her husband's accusers. In 1992, when it all got started, Jennifer Flowers announced she had a 12-year affair with Bill Clinton. Well, Hillary and Bill, they raced to CBS in 60 Minutes. Why? To trash her character. And then later, Hillary attempted to smear Flowers when telling Vanity Fair, quote, well, if we'd been in front of a jury, I'd say, Miss Flowers, isn't it true that you were asked by the AP in June of 1990 and you said no? Weren't you asked by the Arkansas Democrat and you said no? I mean, I would crucify her. Wow. Now, Bill, of course, later ended up testifying under oath. Yes, Jennifer told the truth. He did have a sexual relationship with Jennifer Flowers. And in the case of Monica Lewinsky, well, Hillary's friend, Diane Blair, wrote in her journal that Hillary called the young White House intern, she's in her young 20s, a narcissistic Looney Tune. And then there's Kathleen Willey, who accused Bill Clinton of groping and grabbing and fondling and touching and kissing her against her will. Well, she later said that Hillary enabled Bill's horrific behavior. Juanita Broderick said that Hillary Clinton tried to intimidate her after she was allegedly raped by Bill Clinton. And we can't forget how Hillary Clinton blamed all of this, all of it. They're all in a vast right-wing conspiracy. Remember this.
The great story here, for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it, is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president.
All right, what close Clinton allies, members of the media, and Hillary herself, what they did here is shameful and reprehensible, and it went on 30 years. 30 years they protected Bill Clinton, a sexual predator, and they helped cover up and make excuses for all of his actions. We got a busy news night tonight. Joining us now with reaction, Fox News national security strategist Sebastian Gorka, conservative commentator Monica Crowley, trial attorney Rebecca Rose Woodland. Where do we start, Rebecca?
Well, I mean, there are so many people. Every day there are more. With Charlie Rose, at least he was fired today. At least he admitted he did these things, so these victims are not further victimized by the press and people who just keep insisting that all these women are lying. There can't be this many women lying. It can't be a whole group of people throughout the course of America who are lying. It's not possible. It doesn't make sense.
We are in this moment now, Sean, because for decades, this kind of horrid behavior has been covered up, excused, and accepted. And so now with the Harvey Weinstein piece in the New York Times opened the floodgate. And that's why you have now this explosion of stories. People feel empowered to come out and tell their stories. But here's the interesting thing. This kind of horrid behavior, if you look at politics, for example, goes back to JFK, Ted Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson. But in the modern era,
Ted Kennedy, who left the lion of the Senate that left a woman in the bottom of a body of water. He went home, told nobody. There was a house across the street, and he was so beloved.
Lionized. But in the modern era, a lot of people are putting the current marker at Bill Clinton and his behavior because he was excused by the woman who was the most powerful and influential in the country, not just in his life, but Mrs. Clinton. So there's a special place in hell, Sean, for the women who have covered for this kind of behavior.
Listen to what I said about John Conyers. I never liked the thing that John Conyers ever said. Politically, we're on opposite sides. John Conyers says no. Others say it didn't happen. I believe Clarence Thomas was smeared at the last minute. You see October surprise after October surprise, whether it's a DUI for George Bush or an allegation in a campaign 30 days out of an election. Sometimes it's not true. What do we do? How should people act when one side says it happened, and without smearing them like the Clintons did for 30 years, and take their allegations seriously, especially in the case of, wow, is it pedophilia? We need to find out. We need to know. We need in every case to know the truth. But how do you balance that? And then I'll get to Sebastian in a minute.
Well, this is the issue now. With Conyers, we're bringing up a huge issue in Congress.
Am I right to give him the presumption of innocence?
No, absolutely not. That's
I'm wrong to do that?
No, you're absolutely right. I'm sorry. You're absolutely right to do it, as you've done it over the last week. I think you should.
I've done it my whole career, Rebecca.
Well, I'm saying with all these victims, we've discussed this over and over. I mean, that's what the Constitution provides. Absolutely. The problem with Congress is there's not a body that is investigating carefully, distinctively, and without some sort of, there's a whole shadow over this Office of Compliance that women have to go to. It's not only women, men as well, have to go to if they were harassed. And this Office of Compliance is shrouded in secrecy. So there might be a way for, with all of these complaints now, to restructure that and have a better place for people to go.
If we're going to have a coming to Jesus moment, I think in the end, as a father, I have 3 sisters, Dr. Gorka. Just the people that admitted these things and groping Franken with his with what he did to poor Leanne Tweeden is enough. You know, but it was conservatives that were out there on the front line saying, wow, all of these women, and there was more besides Juanita and Kathleen and Paula and Monica. There were a lot of other women involved in this too that I interviewed over the years. How do you balance that? And how much damage do liberals do in terms of they want the mantle that they are the great protectors of women's rights, but yet they were involved in protecting the Clintons all those decades?
Now, that's the real question. So you've been very, very righteous in terms of giving the question of the reasonable doubt, the idea that you have to prove the case, the presumption of innocence, whether it's Judge Moore, whether it's John Conyers. But let's step back and let's talk about that bigger issue. The left as a whole has no vision and no morals. They are spiritually and politically bankrupt, Sean. Why? Because they made this all possible. Whether it was covering for Ted Kennedy, whether it was covering for Bill Clinton, they've created this mantra for 30 years. It's just sex. It's okay. It's private. Don't worry about it. This created a culture of permissiveness. As a result, the political side of the aisle that says we are for women, we support the victims, they have completely hollowed out their own moral standing. And I want to see a reckoning right now. I want to see the real feminists get out on the street. I don't care what kind of hat they're wearing, but I want them to protest because, hey, we're the right. They hate us. I get it. But they made this possible on their own side. Let's talk about Charlie Rose. Charlie Rose?
Let me ask Monica this question. You know, what convinced me is right from the get-go with the Clintons, Jennifer Flowers had tapes. They actually said, dude, you doctored the tapes. I don't know if that, you could hear it was his voice. You can hear an intimate conversation that was going on there, but they still went out, denied it. Years later, he had to admit it.
Yeah,
and they go on saying,
just to be clear, that was a consensual relationship, though, Sean, with Jennifer Flowers.
That different, very different. Agreed, but he still lied.
Yes.
Okay, and that was part of it. And she was smeared, and she was telling the truth. That's the difference. You know, in the case of how much will science now play a role? One of the things I thought in the Roy Moore case, for example, is I talked to a 42-year expert in handwriting analysis, said you give him, he's done this 42 years. It's an art. It's a science. And he's going to be able to tell you forensically if the ink is new or old, and forensically if he can look at his handwriting at the time with that yearbook, there's their answer.
Right. And these investigations should go on because nobody should be smeared in this way if the charges are false. Problem is here, time is of the essence, right? There's another point about hypocrisy that I want to make, Sean. Over these last couple of decades, every Republican that's been embroiled in some sort of sex scandal, the left has piled on because they used to say that conservative ran as a family values candidate or a family values
So if you have
Republican,
no standards,
so they're
you're better off.
But the left is equally as hypocritical in this sense, where they position themselves as big champions of women. And yet in their private lives, what's coming to light now is that their behavior against women has been absolutely atrocious.
Closing remarks, Dr. Gorka, we'll go to you first.
I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, Sean. I think we have to, strap on our seatbelts and hold tight, because I think this is the beginning of an avalanche. And I hope it means that the left will have to clean house. No more double standards, no more playing the victim card. And let's have...
They protected him through 2016. The only reason that they're doing it now is because they don't need the Clintons anymore.
Correct.
Clintons can't do anything for him anymore. All right, sorry, Rebecca, last word.
I think I agree with Dr. Gorka. This is the beginning of an avalanche, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to change values in this country and to change the way we treat victims and how we handle.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful, though. This is dangerous territory.
And just a word of warning, this kind of behavior has no political or partisan boundaries.
Oh, you're going to, oh, yeah.
So while, a lot of these perpetrators and predators are on the left, look, it could be a big conservative tomorrow. So let's just
Should
make
Franken
sure
have
that
to
we
resign,
apply
or let the people of Minnesota decide?
Well, the people of Minnesota should decide, as the people of Alabama should decide on
Who should decide in Franken's case with the picture? You have evidence?
I think Al Franken should resign himself.
You do,
I think
Dr.
he
Gorka?
should take himself out, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, without a question of a doubt. The proof's there. He's admitted it. It's not hearsay. We have the proof.
All right, thank you all for being with us. When we come back, Newt Gingrich is here. He'll react to my opening monologue. Later, new details about the Uranium One scandal. It is now beginning to cascade down as we get closer to the truth. And I have a challenge for NBC News. Andy Lack, you may want to turn your television on. That and more tonight on Hannity. And welcome back to Hannity as we continue with reaction to all today's big stories and news. Author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Vengeance, former Speaker of the House, Fox News contributor, Newt Gingrich. So you have all of these cases, in some cases, these sexual harassment cases, mistreatment of people cases, and some people admit it. And then you have instances where they do not. Then we are hearing $15 million of taxpayer money was paid out by members of Congress. Shouldn't the American people, if they don't want to pay it themselves, shouldn't we know whose money, who's paying what, where, and how?
Sure. Look, I mean, this whole thing is, if you back out for a minute, this whole thing is crazy. It's a very good thing for us to explore. We're learning a lot of stuff that's a huge surprise. I don't see why, if it's a personal offense, I don't see why the taxpayers ought to pay a penny. And I think that that's something we ought to really look at carefully in terms of where have the taxpayers' money gone to cover up incidents like this. But I also want to take just a minute, Sean, and maybe this makes me, an outlier or somebody who's out of touch with the times. I think there's an enormous difference between Harvey Weinstein, who clearly is a sexual predator and who clearly was exploiting his position of power, and President George H.W. Bush, who is in his 90s in a wheelchair. And I think we have all of these things coming together because of the infantile stupidity of our news media, as though they're all the same problem. Now, the topic is an important topic, and finding a way to have not just a workplace, but to have a community where people are not being harassed or being preyed upon, I think that's important. Finding what the rules ought to be, and I commend Speaker Paul Ryan, who immediately responded by talking about getting mandatory training in the House. I think Senator McConnell's taken the same position in the Senate. I think we deserve to know, the American people, who did the money get paid out to, and who paid for it, and why is the taxpayer on the hook for any of this? So that part is a legitimate public policy question.
Well, if they wanted anonymity, they should have used their own dollars, right? If they wanted to make a deal, they should that should be their money. No?
Right, absolutely. And I think you're going to find the same things happening in corporations, where people are going to be very skeptical of the idea that you could spend the stockholders' money to cover up things that the stockholder didn't approve of you covering up. But I also think, I think what we've suddenly done is we have unearthed a lot more bad behavior and a lot more destructive behavior than anybody, certainly than I would have thought was going to happen, including some very positive people who I'm actually shocked to see showing up in some of these attacks.
What about the cases where there's no clear line, there's no Al Franken picture, and you don't know for sure? We saw what happened with the Duke lacrosse kids, and that's one of just a number of examples where so many in the media have been so wrong so often. There's a risk here that one allegation could destroy somebody, and it's not true, or it's far more nuanced than anybody wants to know.
Yeah, look, I think it's time, and I'm going to go straight out on a limb about this. We've had a very long tradition in America going all the way back to the Boston Massacre in the 1770s, that you are innocent until proven guilty, and that you have the right of a presumption of innocence. And I think, again, if you have somebody like Harvey Weinstein, who now has so many names out there that it's almost inconceivable that he isn't guilty of a substantial amount of stuff, you start getting this, somebody remembered that 12 years ago they felt bad. Boy, I don't understand the standard that goes into that. And then how do you prove what really happened? And how do you prove whether or not somebody really meant to do something negative? And I do think we've got to take a deep breath here and not have the hysteria allow us to start destroying people randomly, so that you then set up targets where anybody who wants to can get even by suddenly remembering something that happened 20 years ago.
It gets hard, too, when there's politics in the equation, where, Clarence Thomas would be a case in point. Last-minute allegations thrown out there on the eve of a Senate hearing or on the eve of an election in October. Surprise, George W. Bush, the weekend before that election with Al Gore, the DUI came out. So in the whole year and a half prior, nobody knew about that. That wasn't planned. That wasn't a last-minute October surprise to influence voters, where somebody doesn't really have a chance to help themselves or prove they're grown beyond an instant like that.
Well, I think that's part of it. Part of it's manipulation of the public by liberal news media trying to make a point. Part of it is, I think, that you've got to look at some of these things and ask yourself, why are they coming up now? What's the evidence? And again, if it was it a situation that in fact was basically innocent, but is now subject to misinterpretation? When I see people who weren't particularly offended 10 or 12 or 15 years ago, but suddenly there's now this hysteria, and so they decide they're going to join the lynch mob, and they got their story to tell. I just think we as a country ought to take a deep breath and think carefully. And again, I say this, whether it's about my wife, my two daughters, my granddaughter, for that matter, my grandson, because remember, you have many instances now of sexual harassment that involves men as well as women. So I think all of us want to protect the innocent, but we also have to remember that the innocent may be on both sides of that equation, and it's not automatically clear that a charge is the same as a conviction.
So Sarah Carter, who's going to join us later tonight, is now reporting that this FBI informant, this guy worked for over 4 years for the FBI and knew about Vladimir Putin, had established a network inside of the United States. Their goal was to crack into the uranium market. And he has documents, he has emails, he has firsthand experience, and apparently even tapes. Sarah Carter is referring to it as a treasure trove of information, proving, and that's where the bribery and the kickbacks and extortion and money laundering all took place, proving that that all happened. And yet that was 2009 before the approval of Uranium One. It seems to now be cascading. The floodgates seem open. How far should this go? Is this something the Justice Department can handle? Is this special counsel area? Where do you think it should go?
Well, first of all, notice the infantilism of the American media today. The next story by somebody about something that may or may not have happened 12 years ago, as long as it's sexual, boy, that's going to be a big story. Here you've got an enormous historic story. You apparently have the head of Russia in a methodical project trying to gain access and influence over Bill and Hillary Clinton while she is Secretary of State, trying to get control of the American uranium market, willing to spend apparently well over $100 million. You have an FBI source who apparently was ignored deliberately by the Obama administration, who is out there saying, wait a second, guys, look at all this evidence. I don't understand how the House and Senate can avoid having in-depth weeks of hearings, taking this whole thing apart, subpoenaing everybody, making public all of the information about the Clinton Foundation, about Bill Clinton's personal earnings. I mean, how many different ways were the Clintons making money out of this? And does anybody really believe all this was innocent? I mean, I think it's astonishing. And by the way, it goes beyond the Clintons. It goes right to the Obama administration, to the corruption of the Justice Department, and to a level of problems that I think are truly historic.
All right, Mr. Speaker, appreciate you being with us. Thanks so much. And next, new details about the Uranium One scandal continue to trickle out. Sarah Carter, Greg Jarrett, they're here to respond. And also later tonight, I have a challenge. All of you that are friends with Andy Lack, may tell him to get to a TV. I have a message for him tonight. And welcome back to Hannity. So last night, The Hill's John Solomon, he broke a huge story about Uranium One. And according to the memos that he obtained, the FBI informant at the center of this case gathered years of evidence on Russia's plot to control U.S. nuclear fuel deals, including the Uranium One deal. Now, Solomon has boiled down the newest revelations in a piece for The Hill detailing the 5 new revelations. Now, first, Russia saw its purchase of Uranium One as part of a larger strategy to dominate global uranium markets, including making the United States more dependent on Moscow's nuclear fuel. Great, it's our uranium. Next, Uranium One did export some of its U.S. uranium ore. Then, the FBI informant does have information to share with Congress about Rosatom's Uranium One purchase. Next, the FBI did have evidence that Rosatom officials were engaged in criminality well before the Obama administration approved their purchase of Uranium One. And finally, Justice officials, well, they trusted Campbell, he's the informant, enough to keep him working undercover for 6 years and to pay him more than $51,000 once convictions were secured. Here with reaction, investigative reporter Sarah Carter, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett is with us. Sarah, let's start with you because you also had a piece. You call it a treasure trove now of information. I only thought it was 4 years. It's 6 years the informant worked for the FBI. But these were years long before CFIUS went ahead, the 9 separate agencies, to approve this deal, and we still import uranium. That's the crazy part of it. It's not like we have tons of it, and we can, get rid of any of it.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating, Sean, is if you look at what happened, he was working way back in 2008 for the FBI, but also on the counterintelligence side of it. So he was collecting information on the Russians way back in 2008. So when you look at that and you look at how it all added up together, all of that evidence, and now they're trying to say that Uranium One had nothing to do with the Mikorin case, it doesn't make sense and it doesn't coincide.
Okay, and then, Greg, we get to the heart. So what we have is a network. We have the hostile Russian regime, the hostile actor, Vladimir Putin. And so this is an amazing thing. We have to import uranium because we don't have enough. Right. Now, we know they're in the country in 2009. We know that they're involved in bribery, racketeering, money laundering, extortion.
Right.
Okay. And why? We knew it was Clinton's Putin's guys. Why would we ever make that deal?
There are so many lies associated with what the U.S. government did, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Obama administration did, and you just identified several of them. The biggest lie was that nobody in the government knew about this Russian criminal scheme before the sale of Uranium One, thanks to John Solomon, Sarah Carter, and the thousands of pages of documents they've uncovered. That is simply untrue. Then they said, well, there's no correlation between the criminal acts and the sale of Uranium One. That is also untrue. And then they kick dirt on the informant, saying he really doesn't know anything. My goodness, he has more than 5,000 documents. And they outed him. You know what this is? This is our government at the worst, complicit in allowing a foreign government to engage in an illegal scheme that jeopardized national security, and then they covered it up, and they've been lying about it ever since. That is the government that is aiding and abetting criminality.
They sold out our security. That's going to be the criminality, or part of the criminality in all this that's going to have to be investigated. Sarah, you know the informant. You've talked to the informant.
Yes.
They outed this guy. This guy spent 6 years of his life. Tell us the backstory. He's accumulating this information, documents, emails, tape recordings, his firsthand experience. He sees what Putin's network is doing, the crimes they're committing. He's passing it on to the FBI director. The Eric Holder, the Justice Department, the AG at the time, had to know, and we're told it was put in Obama's daily briefing.
That's absolutely correct. Think about this. There's a lot about this informant that hasn't been made public. I know that Victoria Tonsing, his attorney, is asking for permission to make more information public about him. But let's just go back to when he reported this to the FBI. He went voluntarily, Sean, to the FBI to give them this information. And then he was asked by the FBI and the Justice Department to not leave the job with Rosatom, to not leave the job with 10X, but to stay inside and help them build a case to investigate. So he was doing his due diligence, and he believed it was his patriotic duty to give this information to the Justice Department. Yes, he is absolutely 100%. I have spent months and months and months looking at this. And they paid him more than $200,000, Sean. It wasn't just the $51,000 at the end. It was $200,000 in reimbursements, which sources told me would have gone all the way to the top of the FBI. You just don't give that kind of money out.
So knowing that Putin is doing all of this, why would anybody sign off on that? And where did the money come from as we now look at the connection with everybody associated with Uranium One and the timeline and the Clinton Foundation and Bill's speaking fees? Does that timeline coincide with payments?
Yes, if you look at the payments, some of the payments, for example, the speaking fee, the $500,000 that Bill Clinton got from Renaissance Capital, it certainly coincides. And
Didn't Renaissance have a financial interest in this deal?
Absolutely, they had a financial interest in this deal,
and they're connected to Putin. Isn't Renaissance connected to Putin?
Exactly, directly to the FSB.
Wow, last word.
The informant's debriefing papers show that an entity close to the Clintons was receiving millions of dollars that went to their charity, and then, of course, later tens of millions of dollars to their foundation and Bill Clinton's wallet. Is it a quid pro quo? Is it corruption? It could be bribery.
If you're Hillary Clinton, are you worried tonight?
Oh, she absolutely should be worried, because as the four
people she hates the most tonight are Sarah Carter, John Solomon, you, and she's always hated me. Just hates me more.
Well, she has a lot to be worried about, because if she used her public office to confer a benefit to the Russians in exchange for money, that is pretty strong evidence of a myriad of corruption crimes.
Unbelievable. Sarah, when this informant goes before Congress, how soon will it be where the whole story will be told?
I think it'll happen right after he goes to Congress, Sean. I know that they're going to look at whether they're going to do closed-door hearings and open hearings, but I know he's going to be briefing Congress, and that'll probably be behind closed doors at first, and then there'll be public hearings. And I think that's going to be very valuable, very important for everyone. Everyone in our country.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried should the Clintons be?
15.
I would definitely say 10 plus.
Wow. All right. When we come back, media's ignored this. We're not ignoring it. Another Democrat caught up in a major scandal involving campaign rigging. What is up with these people? I'll give you the details. Later, I also have a serious challenge for the executives, Andy Lack and others at NBC News, as we continue. Welcome back to Hannity. So just when you thought the Democrats, they couldn't be involved in any more scandals, Fox News tonight confirming that the FBI is investigating Pennsylvania Congressman Bob Brady for allegedly paying off his Democratic primary opponent in 2012 and then lying to federal investigators. Not a good idea. According to the charges, Brady secretly paid $90 grand for his opponent, Jimmy Moore, to drop out of the race. And Moore and his former campaign manager have already pled guilty to concealing the payments. Additionally, 2 aides for Brady have been indicted. Sounds like Democrats love rigging elections more than anything else. We reached out to Brady's attorney for comment. Shockingly, we haven't heard back. Here with reaction, Salem, nationally syndicated radio host Larry Elder, Fox News correspondent at large Geraldo. Hillary rigged the election according to the primary. According to Donna Brazil, she tried to rig it with the Fusion GPS, propaganda lies dossier about hookers in a Ritz-Carlton with Trump in Moscow, Geraldo. I mean, what is it with Democrats rigging elections now?
Isn't it nice, Sean, to have a good old political corruption story rather than all those icky sex scandals we've been hearing about for the last several weeks?
It's insane. I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Stealing $90,000. This guy Brady, he's not just any Democrat. He's the head of the Philadelphia machine. He's a very, very important person. He's the ranking member of the Committee on House Administration. He is the biggest ward healer, old style, gregarious, 6'2" Irish Italian, son of a cop, backslapper, very popular. But he feared an opponent running in a plurality black district, a black man running. So he engineered a scheme, allegedly, or some believe, he's not charged yet, he just had a search warrant executed against him, engineered a scheme whereby they couldn't just give the insurgent candidate 90 grand, so they created fake businesses, they tried to launder the money. 3 of his associates, the congressman's associates, were involved. 1 has already turned state's evidence.
He's
so
just basically taken Hillary's
trouble, Sean.
Let me sum it up into this. He basically has taken Hillary Clinton's right out of a page out of her book. Larry.
News bulletin. Democrats cut corners in campaign races. How about Harry Reid going to the floor of the Senate in the 2012 race and saying the word on the street is that Mitt Romney hasn't paid taxes? And then when Harry Reid retired, he was asked about this by CNN, and he said, well, he didn't win, did he? How about Donna Brazil getting the debate questions to Hillary ahead of time? I mean, come on. Democrats cut corners, shockingly.
Yeah, shocking. The thing is...
But Larry, you don't for a second pretend that it's just the one party involved. I mean, there's plenty of this to go around. The Republicans are the principal engineers of the gerrymandering, the rigging these districts so they maximize the impact of the state vote. Listen, there's plenty of sleaze to go around. What is interesting in this case is that this is truly one of the giants of the old-style Democratic urban machine. Philly's rotten. I mean, since 2000, had 30-plus Democrats have been indicted, jailed. The other congressman, 11-termer, he went down. He's in jail now. So, this is following a house of cards pattern.
Larry?
Geraldo, going to the floor of the Senate, as Harry Reid did, as leader of the Senate, and saying the word in the street is Mitt Romney hasn't paid taxes, knowing full well it wasn't true, that's on a whole nother level. Stealing the debate questions and getting them to Hillary ahead of time, and therefore shafting Bernie Sanders, that's on a whole nother level. If there's been a comparable thing the Republicans have done, tell me about it. But who is it?
Geraldo,
how about disenfranchising black voters? How about disenfranchising black voters by rigging?
You mean the way Al Gore tried to do?
My point is this: it's just like the sex.
You mean the way Al Gore tried to get those military ballots dismissed, like that?
Yeah, like that.
But that's exactly when you say. But Geraldo, when you say that. This is a narrative I reject, that Republicans are racist. I resent it. It happens every 4 years. Here's the problem. To get into the Democratic National Convention that we both go to every 4 years, guess what? You need a picture ID, the Democratic Convention.
Sean, my feeling about political corruption And I think that in one sense you're right. I think that urban, old-style party, Tammany Hall-type politicians maybe are more prone to or more used to being corrupt. But my feeling about corruption is the same as my feeling about these sex harassment scandals. There's plenty to go around for everybody, right, left,
You can't
red,
give me a
blue.
modern-day example
This is a stink.
of Republicans rigging they rigged it. Every Democrat that liked Bernie Sanders, the commie socialist he is, God bless him, their vote should count. The whole thing was rigged from the get-go. She controlled it all, and she tried to do it, Larry, in the general election by paying for Russian lies and propaganda. How ironic, considering the last year of Trump-Russia nonsense.
And how about the fact that Juanita Broaddrick made allegations 25 years ago? Nobody cared. Now, all of a sudden, the Clintons are no longer in power. It's okay to throw them under the bus. What about that hypocrisy? What about Kathleen Willey saying that Bill Clinton basically did something inappropriate in the Oval Office, and then a couple of days later, one of the nation's top feminists, Gloria Steinem, writes a piece in the New York Times and says, well, even if you believe what Kathleen Willey says, it's not sexual harassment because when she told him to stop, he stopped. Are you kidding me?
Unbelievable.
This is the principle into which the left twisted themselves
30
to defend
years,
the Clintons.
30 years of abusing these women, Geraldo.
I think that what President Clinton did, and you and I have had this argument before, Sean.
Yeah, 10
he
seconds.
was a man whose entire life was raked over the coals. I'm talking about Bill Clinton. He was impeached, dishonored, disbarred.
We will pick this
what
up.
do you want to
We
do?
will pick this
Flog
up.
him?
An important message and challenge for NBC News next. Thanks, guys. We all know the news media in this country is abusively biased. I have a special challenge for NBC News. They lead the pack. Now, for decades, the incredibly liberal left-wing news network has been covering for both Bill and Hillary Clinton. This effort has been led by NBC News chairman. Andy Lack is his name. He also ran the company in the late 1990s. Now, the very same time that Juanita Broaddrick accused then-President Bill Clinton of rape. And as the Washington Post reported, NBC sat on that interview with Broaddrick for at least a month, saying, oh, the story wasn't corroborated at the time. Well, that's not what Lisa Myers told Juanita, and they finally aired it in February of '99. Our challenge to Andy Lack, NBC News, simple. Air the interview with Juanita Broaddrick in its entirety on NBC and prime time. Let the people in this country see and hear and decide for themselves what former President Bill Clinton is accused of doing. Certainly going to be better than those Dateline reruns ad nauseum that you play. NBC News, Andy Lack, are you going to give Juanita Broaddrick the proper platform that you sat on? Or is Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton's reputation still that important to you? They don't have power anymore. All right, that's all the time we have left this evening. This show will never be the mainstream media. We are not the Destroy Trump media. We're fair and balanced. Thank you for being with us. Set your DVR, never miss an episode. Laura Ingraham is standing by in D.C.